Iowa State needs to make some moves in the transfer portal after a season that could only be described as a disappointment. But who will they target? We're talking about it today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day, making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know, wherever you're watching or listening. Be sure to subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Ladies and gentlemen, we are officially in the full-blown off-season swing of things here with the transfer portal heating up. Obviously opened on Monday, some names being thrown around, some names obviously having moved from point A to point B. So we are going to talk about that in today's episode. Obviously what I think Iowa State needs to focus on, some names that can fulfill those roles. And then finally, if those roles are fulfilled and everything seems to go to plan, can Iowa State make a big jump next year? I can't wait to dive into all that and more. And I think the best place to start is with the team needs. Now, obviously, there were some needs that weren't met with the team that we kind of wheeled out on the floor this season. That's kind of the reason that we had around a 32 exit. But also at the same time, I think that you're going to have to address the holes, right, that are created by guys that leave the program this year, right? So Curtis Jones, Keyshawn Gilbert, potentially Dishon Jackson in the transfer portal right now, just a few names off the top of my head. And so you're looking at a true shooter in Curtis Jones, really, a drive and kick type of point guard in Keyshawn Gilbert, who plays amazing defense. And then Dishon Jackson, you're going to lose some size on the inside. And so I do think that those are obviously places that Iowa State would benefit from kind of bolstering up yet again through the transfer portal. Now, as I'm going to get into, we will talk about the incoming freshmen later, today, and then obviously throughout the offseason. But I'm focusing mostly on transfers right now because we have seen success in the transfer portal. Obviously, Curtis Jones from Buffalo and Joshua Jefferson as well, not from Buffalo, but you know what I mean, just these guys coming in and seeing success under TJ Otzelberger's kind of method of doing things, especially Dishon Jackson noting the daily habits that he loves to preach about so much. And so I think all of that to say that, yeah, getting some size is going to be big for this team. I do think that the way that TJ Otzelberger coaches this team with an emphasis on being aggressive and dominating the boards, I think size is a must. I think Iowa State was outsized at times. And notably, there were situations where Iowa State was in foul trouble and forced to kind of play small ball, and they couldn't dominate the boards. And they were kind of forced into a position where they didn't exactly feel super comfortable, or at least look very comfortable. And so I do think that adding some size and potentially some depth to that size department could be very beneficial for this team. Now, I also think that adding a real, true, no-kidding shooter to this team, it would benefit this team. Now, there are two sides to this because it's not really how Iowa State plays basketball at times. It tries not to they kind of try not to really have a true number one shooter that they rely on. At least it feels that way. I don't know if necessarily TJ would be opposed to an absolute true shooter, but also, I mean, you kind of need a guy to lean back on, to rely on. And we just saw how capable Curtis Jones was this season at completely taking over games, turning them around, creating momentum out of nothing, and just blowing the roof off of places with a few dagger threes. So that kind of star power, yes, we talked about the daggers, the hammers, I suppose. It was hammer and dagger, right? So the hammers, I think, could have some impact, and dagger, I think, would probably have a little bit more of an impact, those both being TJ Otzelberger terms. But I don't think that either of those are even close to the same proximity of game impact as just a true shooter can have. And so I do have a few names kind of picked out for some shooters for Iowa State, some top names in the portal right now. But I think that's an important one. I think that's one that we saw success with this season. And Curtis Jones wasn't the most consistent shooter by any means. And to be completely honest, who is going to shoot the lights out every single night? You go on a hot streak, that's different. But over the course of a season, it's tough to maintain an absurd shooting average. So no nothing against Curtis Jones, had an unbelievable season, and we will certainly miss Curtis Jones, but it felt like there were times where he was a little hot and cold, as was everybody on this team, and that maybe is kind of the reason we saw an early exit. So going out after a top shooter, I think, is very important, but also, as I mentioned, the size on the inside, kind of how TJ likes to play. I think that a defensive-minded point guard is a kind of a must-have, kind of a rowdy, almost like a Tamin Lipsey type of mentality in a point guard, but maybe someone with a little bit more scoring ability. I do think that we did mention in the graph video the decline of contribution from Keshon Gilbert throughout the season. And I've kind of had some time to think on it a little bit more. And, when Keshon wasn't contributing as much, yes, Iowa State was finding ways to kind of combat that and to find ways to score, but they weren't winning as many games. And so the dominance of Keshon Gilbert early in the season was a clear kind of like, hey, when he's playing really well, Iowa State able to win games. And I think part of that was his drive and finish around the rim ability, but also the ability to kick it out and create open shots, something that I don't think that this team really got too far into later in the season. I feel like they kind of got away from that when Keshon was either missing or lacking production. I do think that the ability to finish around the rim is what makes a point guard or shooting guard or whoever, what position they play, that ability to finish around the rim, that threat is what creates that extra oomph to that player, right? Because if they can just drive in, yeah, if it's open, of course they'll score. But if they're guarded, then the defense already can begin to shift and potentially cover the three a little bit faster, as opposed to, if he can get it up and finish this, we need to be ready for a rebound, or at least we know he'll attempt it. We need to be ready for a rebound, and that causes the defense to be kind of in a little bit tighter. And then that opens up the opportunity to whip it out to the outside. And so I think if you're able to find someone that can fill in kind of what Keshon Gilbert did, not that it's necessarily completely replicable, but I do think if you can find someone that can do that, that's a major win for the Cyclones. Those are kind of the big 3 points, filling in the holes from the guys leaving this team. But I also think that there are a few things from what I saw I would like to see in the transfer portal kind of addressed. Obviously, rebounding was something that was up and down, I feel like, throughout the year. There were certainly games in which Iowa State dominated on the boards, but also look at BYU and the rebound differential in the first matchup this season. That one, it'll blow your socks off. And if not both, certainly at least one. That is for sure. I think that Iowa State, if they can prioritize kind of that size, that's going to be a big one. In particular, when Iowa State is on the defensive side of the ball, limiting opposing teams' opportunities at a second chance bucket, I think, is big time. But bigger than that, I don't know what the best way to go about this is, but Iowa State needs to limit the turnovers next year. I think that's something that this team struggled with big time, and you can see it across the board. There were a few players that we seem to be okay with just having a bunch of turnovers because, that's their style of play. Well, if that's their style of play, we should look into some guys in the portal that take good care of the ball. Tamin Lipsey is one of those guys that just very calm, controlled, collected, just has very good feel for the game and seems to take care of the ball very well. And I have not looked into the actual statistics to back that up, unfortunately, but I do know that if there was one guy bringing up the ball up the floor at the end of the season, if I could pick, I wanted it to be Tamin Lipsey. I thought he had the most control and the least likely to turn it over. And Joshua Jefferson had a lot of turnovers this year for a man on the inside, especially. Now, that's a high traffic area. That's going to be an area where the ball's getting poked at, prodded, slapped away. I get it. Okay, I completely do. And that's something he'll work on in the offseason. I'm sure something that the team will address or the coaches will address with Mr. Jefferson. And this is not a shot at Jefferson, but it just goes to show that the way players approach their game, you can certainly see some that are more likely to turn the ball over than others. And I think limiting turnovers for this Cyclones team is another spot where they can get marginally better. Later in the season, it felt like the drive ability, obviously with Keshon being missing, is something that they were just it took a shot. It really did make an impact on this team. So that's something. But I've kind of touched on that. The other one is transition and getting set on defense. So it goes both ways. I thought in transition, Iowa State struggled at the end of the year, just in comparison to early on. Those are all real easy areas to address and to coach, quite frankly. You don't have to find someone in the portal to fill those shoes. But I don't think it would be worth your time to at least look at it. And so those are kind of the overarching thoughts. Let's take a look at a few players that Iowa State could and should and potentially already have taken a look at coming up right after this. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free TradeMaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the TradeMaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. So Iowa State has to get busy in the transfer portal. We've talked about what I think they need to do, the areas in which they need to address here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. But we haven't really mentioned many names. A name that has been thrown around up until this point, and obviously a big name, a very tall name, if you will, Oscar Cluff out of South Dakota State. I think this would be a great pickup for the Cyclones at 6'11", 260 pounds. We talked a little bit about what he's accomplished, but quickly, just 17.6 points per game in this season, 12.3 rebounds, 2.8 assists on the year, in shot 63%. I mean, those are pretty unreal numbers. And so obviously a target for the Cyclones, but I've got a few others on this list. Some that have been linked to the Cyclones, some that I just think would be really solid additions. And so let's break it down. Let's kind of fly through these here because I think the last name you guys are going to absolutely love. This one I'm very excited about. Now, let's kind of start with this guy here, Malik Renault. I don't know if this is a guy that Iowa State can snag out of Indiana. This is obviously coming out of Indiana at 10-10 in the conference this year, a solid Big Ten program. Not necessarily someone I think Iowa State can snag a lot of attention around. Mr. Renault, currently rated by, this is the Evan Maya status, Evan Miyakawa, I believe is how you say it, at number 9 in the transfer portal. So kind of a bit of a reach here, with no ties to the Cyclones and a lot of other ACC and Big Ten schools looking at him. This isn't one that I think Iowa State is likely to grab, but a 6'9", 232 guy is certainly somebody that you want on your team, right? Like that just only makes sense, kind of in that front court there, forward. And so that's just a name that stood out to me. Obviously, getting high up on this Miyakawa list is of note, but I think adding size to the inside was one of my main priorities when looking at this list, so I threw him on here. Let me know if you agree or disagree. And so in that same token, from Nevada, the Wolfpack, Nick Davidson at 6'10", 238 pounds, averaged 15.8 points, 6.5 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 33.1 minutes per game, and shot 50% from the floor, 37 from 3. I thought this was a really solid player that Iowa State can at least take a look at. Did lose to Colorado State in the Mountain West Championship quarterfinal. And Colorado State obviously made it to the big dance and made some noise there as well. So not necessarily the end of the world. 8-12 in the conference, not necessarily crazy, but it's not coming from like Air Force at the bottom of the Mountain West either. I thought this was certainly a name that can be just kind of browse. What is this a guy that we, would fit the system? That's the same thing with all these guys, right? Like the culture, it's got to be a guy who understands what's going to happen here at Iowa State and really put their all into the Cyclones. So just because they play well on the court doesn't necessarily mean that they'll be a great Cyclone. And that's nothing against Davidson. I'm just literally saying some names, and obviously TJ will kind of do that evaluation process separately. Another name that kind of stood out to me from San Diego State, didn't quite make as much noise as they have in years past, but Nick Boyd, standing at 6'3", 175 pounds, a guard, averaging 13.4 points a game, almost 4 rebounds, almost 4 assists. That 4 assists is a pretty solid number, shooting 41% on the year. Spent 3 years at FAU and transferred over to SDSU. This is another guy that I just thought was worth mentioning. Ranks 13 in the Miyakawa rankings here. It's just, saw some really valid, just overall production. It really came down to that. I'll leave it at that. And then, this is the fun one. This is what I've been waiting for. My final, well, not my final, because there is one that has been linked to the Cyclones we'll talk about after this. But my final personal addition for the Cyclones. Are you ready? Josh Dix of Iowa, the guard, standing at 6'6", 210 pounds. This would be an unbelievable addition for the Cyclones, and to take one away from the Hawkeyes would be pretty cool. He averaged 14, 3 and 3, shot 51% from the field, 42% from 3. There's also some other, statistics out there on where he was around the rim, mid-range. And I think that this guy has the ability to create. I think this guy has the ability to shoot, something that Iowa State obviously can benefit from. I would be curious to see what the dynamic of like Iowa versus Iowa State would look like. And I don't know how much, these names that we're tossing around, we got to remember part of the reason they're in the portal is because they want to get paid. So I don't know how much what the collective is able to pull together or how that all looks. That's things that we have to keep into consideration here. But I do think that Dix, if there was a way for Iowa State to get him into the building, I think this would be a great addition. And you for Dix, you're no longer on the Iowa Hawkeye side of things. You're no longer in Iowa City. And I think, in my opinion, that's a pretty big win. Final name here that has been tossed around. Connor Enright is potentially linked to the Cyclones. DePaul guard, certainly a dog, not quite in that same category as some of the guys we've mentioned. 6'2", 180 pounds, a little bit undersized there. Averaged 7.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 6 assists this year, and just under 40% from the field. This is a guy that I think Iowa State would certainly benefit from adding. Overall, his 37.5 assist rate was top 20 nationally when playing for the DePaul Blue Demons. This is a guy that there's one problem here, I will say. Was at Drake under coach Darren DeVries. Okay, and where's DeVries now? Indiana. So, hey, he didn't go with him to West Virginia, so there's that. But also, you saw starts to Iowa right after McCollum. There's a chance that Connor Enright follows DeVries to Indiana. I can't tell you for sure what's going to happen there, but that's a name that is being floated around. It's not one that's super high up on my want list per se, but it's a name that Iowa State could add. And we saw guys that, was everybody circling Curtis Jones and Joshua Jefferson before they ended up transferring over to Iowa State? Anybody can become an absolute dog under TJ Otzelberger. I think that's a fair assessment. And so just to look at these pure numbers and say Connor Enright, obviously haven't dove into the tape as the portal is just now opening. But to say that he won't be as good as any of these other guys, he could be miles better. I think that's completely fair, especially with the support system that Iowa State has here, not only in the fans, but in the coaching staff and just the whole culture, I guess, of Iowa State as a whole. Just keep an eye out for Enright. Certainly a name that is being tossed around right now. But let's say Iowa State snags all these guys or some of these guys. Can Iowa State get over the hump and make some real noise next year? I don't know. You're going to have to stick around to find out. Coming up right after this. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? That is me every day. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery, and now I budget smarter and save more. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever as well. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. So Iowa State, if they're able to score big time in the transfer portal, could make some noise next year. They might not. There is no way to tell at this point. Unfortunately, I don't have the answers. If I did, probably be singing a different tune here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We've got some guys leaving Iowa State. We've got some guys coming in. We've got the transfer portal going on. We're not quite sure what's going to happen with that. Let's take a quick look at what we do know. As of right now, we know for sure we know Jefferson and Heisey will be coming back to the team. They both kind of verbally told reporters that they plan to come back. Dishon Jackson in the transfer portal. Mila Momcilovic and Taman Lipsey, I haven't seen anything indicating they are for sure coming back. But also, I think right now it seems like they're leaning towards coming back. That's kind of where all indications are pointing towards. So that's a really solid core for the Cyclones there. And then you want to take a look at the incoming freshmen. There are some unbelievable names in here, and I think Iowa State absolutely knocked it out of the park with this set here. Dominicus Plata, the forward from Germany. Look him up. Yeah, he's going to be a problem for the Cyclones in a good way. Killian Torre, the point guard, he looks a lot like Keyshawn. I am not going to lie. So that is very exciting. Jamarian Bateman and Xavier Mitchell, both from Wisconsin, a guard and a forward there, respectively. This is not a freshman, what can they do this season video. I just wanted to name a few names. Obviously, two forwards, a guard, and a point guard. I think that's just a solid, even distribution. And they'll be able to fill those holes. And then Iowa State making moves in the transfer portal. Let's say all things go right. Okay, I think obviously the freshman class looks good. Let's say the transfer portal looks great. And we get all the returners that we're hoping for. Can Iowa State get over the hump next year and really make some noise? Because this is kind of the season of, I've just seen it called the season of what if, the year of what if. I've heard a lot of people call it disappointment. I don't necessarily know if that's the right word, just because it's a disappointment based on the early season predictions where we thought this team could be, but by the end of the season, I don't think it was necessarily a huge disappointment. I wouldn't really use that word per se, but the standard is now higher. I think that's pretty undeniable. I think that there's a clear movement in Iowa State culture towards it's not about just getting into the tournament and maybe winning a game. It's not about just making it to the second or third round or trying to get a double bye in the Big 12 tournament. It's about winning the Big 12 tournament. It's about making an Elite Eight or a Final Four in the big dance. And so can Iowa State get to that level? Is that even possible? The first, obviously, glaring issue is the main consistent factor, and that's TJ Otzelberger. Now, I hesitate to say issue because this man has completely turned around the Iowa State Cyclones in his last 4 years, obviously making the Sweet 16, then making the tournament, and then making the Sweet 16 again. And then obviously this year and the magical beginning of the season only to fall in the round of 32. What this program was before TJ, what this program is now, I don't think it's fair to say that TJ is like any sort of problem here. But I do wonder if this team is just a little beat up at the end of the year, on the squad show I mentioned, and you really should check it out. That squad show is unbeatable. But I mentioned I wonder if Iowa State would benefit from running a deeper rotation, kind of like a BYU. If TJ wants to run that hockey style quick rotation just to keep minutes down on guys, and to be if this team could be a little deeper in the bench, maybe we see like less minutes or less actual wear and tear throughout the course of the season, which could just be a direct correlation to longevity into, the Big 12 tournament, the last couple games of the conference schedule, but the NCAA tournament. And even with the week of rest that I thought would have helped Iowa State so much, you're still missing Keyshawn Gilbert, who was a major piece to the puzzle, clearly. And Tamin Lipsey was extremely banged up on top of other guys who I'm sure were dealing with things left and right. And so I'm not calling for a coaching mentality change. I'm not saying that at all. I just do wonder if there is something to maybe expanding the rotation, right? We didn't see much of Demarion Watson, but it felt like when he was out there, he was rolling. And obviously TJ knows best. He's the one that sees these guys every single day. But that was a name that the fans were calling for. Why are we not seeing more of Demarion Watson, especially late in the season? And I don't have the answer for you, but I do wonder if that's something worth considering. If that's how you want to run this team, run them into the ground, expect them to give 125% effort when they're on the floor, which is I think the best way to do it. I really do. But basketball is kind of a long season, kind of a lot of games, kind of a lot of practices, kind of a lot of wear and tear on these guys. So if you can kind of distribute that throughout the course of maybe 10 guys instead of the normal 8-man rotation, you also kind of distribute fouls throughout that team better. It's not the perfect answer. There was some great pushback from the Big 12 squad on why that may not be the right answer. I just think it's something worth potentially visiting, just because we've seen these teams completely beaten up at the end of their run each year. And so I do wonder on that front. But outside of that, the returning core of this Iowa State team in Tamin and Milan is an extremely strong set of guys, on top of Jefferson, who I've talked about, I believe is very, very solid. The incoming freshman, I think, can make some real noise. And then you look at, we don't know who's coming into the transfer portal, of course, yet at this point, but you look at what this team has done in the past, what TJ has done in the past, and what this team could get in value from the portal. I think it's hard. It's really hard for me to say that they won't be successful next year. Now, the transfer portal, the exact names we get will obviously, and they'll determine where I think that this team will fall. Okay, I'm not going to make a prediction right now that they're going to win the Big 12, just because we don't know what's happening in the transfer portal, and we're also like a year away, so that would be a way too early prediction. But I do think that it's worth saying that they really could make some noise just based on the returning core. I don't think that's unfair to say, and with TJ's history in the transfer portal. Now, I think it really comes down to with this strong of a core, TJ's coaching, and I don't know what's going to happen there. I imagine there will be no change. And is that the right thing? Because we've seen now this team, yes, you win the tournament, the Big 12 tournament in 23-24, but nothing past the Sweet 16. And this year, this team was supposed to be kind of the team. Obviously, last year was a magical year as well, but this year just felt a little bit different for a lot of the year, I think, for a lot of people. And it flamed out pretty quickly. So that is, I'm not saying that there needs to be a change, but I'm just wondering if it's worth looking at. And like I said, no basketball coach, but I'm seeing a little bit of a pattern here. And I do wonder if it's worth maybe, I mean, BYU was so ready at the end of the double overtime, making in my opinion, better decisions just because they weren't so fatigued because they had more guys. Right. And you're less fatigued. You're going to shoot a little bit better. Right. You got your legs under you. It felt like Milan didn't have his legs against Ole Miss so many minutes over the course of the season. Yes, he did miss quite a bit of time in the middle, but you got to remember when he's out like that, you're not in complete basketball conditioning shape. So that obviously throws a wrench into things as well. Again, Not the coach. TJ's the coach. I just wonder if it's worth potentially looking at. You let me know down below what you think. Can this team break the Sweet 16 barrier? I think they can. I really do. I can't wait to see it in action next year. That's going to do it for today, folks. Be sure to subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone State, and we could potentially get Josh Dix in an Iowa State uniform. Let me know if that's something that you want to see. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.